Hello and welcome to Getting Your Money's Worth, the show that focuses on value. I'm Judith West and our guest is Robin Nagle, Anthropologist-in-Residence for the Department of Sanitation, City of New York, and on the faculty of NYU teaching anthropology?
Yes.
Oh, good, I got it all in.
Yes, you did.
Okay, now we have no time for the show. Hi, Robin. Thanks for being on. Well, there's of the titles that I mentioned. Anthropologist-in-Residence for the Department of Sanitation has got to have some people saying, what?
Indeed.
So tell us, what does that mean?
Well, I have two primary goals. One is to help people inside the Department of Sanitation recognize the legacy that they're a part of and the importance of their work so that they can have pride in what they do. And the other goal is to help the public in the same way, help them recognize and understand the importance of the Department of Sanitation. And many elements of the work are very difficult and in fact very dangerous. It's statistically more dangerous to be a sanitation worker than to be a police officer or a firefighter.
Really?
You are more likely to be killed or injured in the line of duty as a sanitation worker, which most people don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I don't want to be crude or anything, but honestly, most people, don't have such lofty opinions of the garbage man.
That's right.
I mean, we say Department of Sanitation, but that's not the slang word or the buzzword that people use. So, you want to instill pride in what they do. How do you do that?
Well, there's many things we do. I'm finishing a book about what it is to be a sanitation worker, and to learn that.
How do you know that?
Well, I took the job.
You were a sanitation worker?
I was a sanitation worker,
really?
Very proudly a sanitation worker.
You wore the uniform and everything?
I wore the uniform. I learned how to drive the truck.
You're kidding.
I was so proud to learn how to drive the truck.
I don't blame you.
And I became broom qualified. You know those really noisy street sweepers?
Yeah.
That make all the dust and seem to... I can operate. You don't drive those, you operate those.
You operate?
Yes, you operate those. With the broom. I can do that. I plowed snow, and no one in the Bronx was killed, which was, I was very glad that I didn't kill any children or puppies or anybody.
I mean, I think that's one time when sanitation workers are very much appreciated, Robin,
that's right.
with the snow.
That's right. That's right. And they recognize that too. That when there's a big heavy snow, like they're supposed to be on this coming weekend, they'll be front and center, and they'll get a lot of accolades.
So how is it? I mean, you're a Ph.D.
Yes.
You have a Ph.D. in anthropology. You're a well-educated woman. What gave you this fascination with the Department of Sanitation?
Once upon a time, back in the early 1970s, when Earth Day had just started and environmentalism was part of the conversation for the first time, my father and I went hiking in the Adirondacks. And it's beautiful, it's green, it looks like there's never been a human presence in this place ever. And we get to our campsite, and there behind the lean-to where we would sleep was a dump. People had left behind a pile of trash. They were too lazy to pack out what they had packed in. And I was stunned, I was angry, I was confused. I didn't understand who they thought would clean up after them. So that's the central question. Who did they think would clean up after them? And the question sort of stayed and grew. And when I moved to New York in the early 1980s, my question then was, well, who does clean up after me? And very slowly over many, many years, I realized I could actually come to know not just the answer to the question, which of course is the Department of Sanitation, but who does the work? Who picks up the trash? Who drives the trucks? Who organizes all of that labor? Who takes the job? Who likes the job? What's it like to wear the uniform? So all my questions about our relationship to garbage grew from that pivotal moment when I was a kid.
Okay, let's answer some of these questions, though, because I think that they're good questions that anyone would ask. Who does take the job? What is the profile of somebody who wants to become a sanitation worker?
Well, a whole lot of people want to. Something like 70,000 people took the last written exam.
70,000?
So, yes.
How many positions?
Well, it varies from over time, but right now there are just over 7,000 sanitation workers employed by the City of New York.
So 10 times as many as there are workers took the exam?
Yes.
Okay.
But then they have to pass a physical exam. So the written exam is one thing, but then you have to pass the physical exam.
Do people take this because it's a good paying job? I mean, they certainly don't take it for the honor.
Well,
or do they?
Well, it's a legacy job in the sense that families will see an uncle or a father in the job, a grandfather, and realize that it is a good job in many ways. So they'll encourage sons and cousins and nephews and now nieces and daughters to step forward. There's actually a team in Brooklyn, a father-daughter.
Really?
He was on the job for 19 years. She was 19 years old and was hired as a sanitation worker. They don't work out of the same garage, but they're both in Brooklyn.
How many female sanitation workers are there?
Very few, fewer than 200.
And they can do they can do the work, the same work?
Oh, they certainly can, or they wouldn't be hired to do it. You have to be.
So
able
there's
to do
no
it.
double standard.
No, well, some of the men would tell you that there is a double standard, but it was the last uniformed service to hire women in New York, and there's still sometimes you'll sense some unwelcome to the women sometimes. Right. But I know lots of men who've worked with women in the truck who say that the best partner they ever had, worked harder than anybody, was a better colleague than anybody was.
Well, women are hard workers.
Well, and that you're not going to take the job if you don't think you can do it, because you'll break your back. I mean, physically, it's extremely demanding.
So it tends to be a legacy.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah, and it's security.
Well, yes. Once you pass your year of probation, it's kind of difficult to get fired. Right. There are some things that will cost you your job, but you have a very strong union standing behind you. After you reach, the starting salary is low, just like police, it's around $25,000. But it begins to go up after the first 6 months, and then after 5 years, you can, with overtime, you can make a very good living.
Right.
And you do get a pension after 20 years. You get excellent benefits.
And your sanitation workers are not really so injured by the economy. I mean, it's more or less it's a commodity that's needed no matter how the economy is doing.
In fact, the better the economy, the more garbage there is out there.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So continue us on the journey. We understand how you became interested, what kind of people become. And you are now an anthropologist in residence. What do you actually do aside from, do you actually go through the garbage? I mean, anthropology,
No.
What do you actually do?
I'm a cultural anthropologist, so I want to know what the people are doing.
You're about more the mores of the culture.
Exactly. What is it like to work for this agency? What is it like to wear the uniform, to have the identity of sanitation worker, whom, as you pointed out, many people will still call garbage man, though I have to use that label in quotes because it's...
Well, so did I.
No, I know you did. Thank you. An archaeologist would go through the garbage.
Oh,
and there are people who do that. There's a fellow at Stanford who's a classically trained archaeologist who spent 35 years of his career going through household trash and landfills all over the United States, as an archaeologist would do, to interpret the culture.
Yeah,
but I want to look at, well, you asked what I'll do as anthropologist in residence. We're founding a museum for the Department of Sanitation. Transit, police, and fire all have museums. There's a museum of sex right down the corner. There's a museum of skyscrapers.
There is a museum of sex, why?
Yeah. Well, there should be a museum of sanitation. It's key to the city's history and to its current stature as a global...
There may be people who would argue with you using sex as a standard, but listen, why
I'm just
not?
saying a list of stuff that's out there.
Everything.
There's one for everything, and there should be one for this.
In reading some in the article I read about you in the New York Times, the point was made that sanitation workers can tell the demography of the block or the neighborhood by the garbage they pick up. Mm-hmm. I mean, that must be very interesting to an anthropologist.
Very much so.
Culturally.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Sure. I've asked them when I've been with them on their rounds, tell me what you know about this neighborhood, particularly guys who've been doing the same routes for many years. And they can tell you how the economy of a given neighborhood has gone up or down, how different groups of people, maybe by ethnicity or by religion, have moved in or moved out. They can even tell you details like a given building has had many new babies or many new divorces, or rates of alcoholism have gone up, or alcoholism has stopped being a problem and somebody's turned his life around. They can tell you down to that kind of detail.
Well, I guess they don't see the bottles.
Well, they don't see the bottles, or suddenly they see a lot more.
Oh, I see.
Or they see...
What's the sign of divorce?
Well, this is one of my favorite ones. You'll see a photograph of a couple ripped in two, and one of the faces has been decimated, with, like cut out or
Right.
burned or something,
Right.
and they'll surmise that probably that couple has perhaps fallen apart. Now, it's
fascinating.
You'd have to find out if it's true, what they're determining. You'd have to go back and do sort of other forms of analysis.
Yeah,
but as a snapshot, I think it's very savvy.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a snapshot, it sounds very savvy.
Yeah.
And very often, sometimes, I think these snapshot views are as much on the money as all the data.
Oh, that's right. All the long, tedious studies.
I wanted to ask you also about what they pick up. I've lost my train of thought. I wanted to ask you how you relate then the Department of Sanitation work that you do to the teaching that you do at NYU.
Well, the department concerns itself with what we have decided no longer has value. So we put it on the curb for collection. It's garbage. But how did it lose value? I teach a class called Garbage in Gotham, the Anthropology of Trash.
The Anthropology of Trash.
Yeah, and one of the questions we consider is how does an object have value or have that value withheld? Why do we decide something is worth buying, keeping, cherishing, but then in a different context or a different moment we decide we can reject it? So that's one of my questions. How does private property itself come into play with things that you value and keep or things that you decide to throw away? How do we stand against the change of time? Nothing is permanent. Nothing is permanent. But we want it to be.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever gone, but sometimes I've gone to these estate sales.
Yes.
Out of them, and I find it so sad. These beautiful albums full of family photographs.
Yes.
I mean, they're just laying there
They
for
were
a
treasures.
dollar or
That's
two.
right.
They were somebody's treasures and beautifully mounted. You know, in the days when you used to mount them with corners.
That's right. Those little black.
Little corners. Just laying there.
Yeah.
It seems it's so sad.
If you do a survey of people, if you ask them what are your most valuable possessions, they don't say the new DVD player or the fancy car. They say things like the photo album, my grandmother's piano, the grandfather clock, the baby clothes from my
the things that are memories.
The things that have meaning to them as individuals. Yeah.
Well, I have to say, we have very little time. You have certainly presented a very different picture of the Department of Sanitation. But in the last minute or so, tell me, how many tons of garbage are there picked up in New York City daily?
Daily, 13, including recycling, between 13 and 14,000 tons.
Right.
Every day.
Yeah. What are these folks going to do? How do these folks feel about thinking green?
Well, they pick it up and they put it in the truck, and then they drive the truck to the dump. If it goes to a repurposing center instead of to the dump, that's fine. If it goes to a recycling center instead of to the dump, that's fine. But they're going to pick it up.
But their
job is to pick it up.
Their job is to pick it up.
And if people think to say thank you to their sanitation workers, then I have succeeded.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you right now that count me in.
Good.
I'm going to be one of those that say thank you. It was a pleasure having you on. Thank you very much. You're watching Getting Your Money's Worth. Thanks for watching.